We're doing well. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for asking. Hey, to you, for some people, spring is rebirth. For you, is it training camp?
Yeah, it feels like that, right? It's like the first day back. You know, you only have a month off, I guess. I guess you could consider spring rebirth.
I think we lost Nick there. I think we lost his cell phone there, to be honest with you. And we will take a moment to get Nick back. And Todd may have to there we go. Hello, Nick.
Hello.
There we go. You only had like a month off, and now you're back doing this. It must feel good to at least get back in the saddle for this.
Yeah, it is. It's like, I don't know if it's like a rebirth, but it's like a rejuvenation.
Yeah.
Right? We get to talk football and do different things again with these guys, you know, and you get them really close up here in Latrobe. It's such a unique setting. I think the Steelers specifically having it out here in Latrobe every single year, you get to know these guys more intimately. It's like everything's back in the past. Come on next week. That's when it really hits, guys. So that's when football is really back for me. That's when I feel it.
Yeah, I mean, this is something when it comes to training camp. Every training camp used to be like this. But, for example, like the Patriots, they have theirs at Gillette Stadium now. You know, they aren't the only ones that are taking it to their own stadium. What is it about this setting and about the Steeler organization that really makes it special?
You know, I think for one, I think Latrobe is so much more intimate just because of it being a small campus, a small town. You know, it goes outside of Pittsburgh, but not really. Latrobe is still part of Pittsburgh, and you see all the fans come from all over the world, and I mean that the world. I've seen people from Mexico, and I've seen people from Japan. I've seen, you know, people, even though it's in the United States, come from the islands of Hawaii. I mean, it really is crazy how far people come just to come to Latrobe. And you really see them craft an experience for those fans. And, you know, Mike Tomlin also, I think him being the type of person that he is, he crafts an environment. You know, he'll address the fans and welcome them. This organization is as much rooted in tradition as there's any organization in sports. You think about it, they've been here since the 1960s, been around since 1933. It's a long-rooted tradition. And while they could have easily thrown this to the wayside like many other traditions did, when the world stopped in 2020, they didn't. They returned. And that, you know, they craft that. It's a familiarity, and it's such an intimate setting. And I think, you know, the Steelers, as an organization, they really love that. They really love being able to, you know, go fan to player. An organization can touch out to a small town that's part of the Steelers' footprint. And I think that's part of what makes this so special.
The Steelers over the years have rarely changed coaches. The Steelers over the years, to be honest with you, except for maybe a period of time here or there, have rarely changed quarterbacks. Now we've been in an era of quarterback change. So Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are both there. We know Wilson's the number one going in. How interested are you, Nick, to see how this offense works with Arthur Smith and Wilson and the, quote, weapons they have?
Yeah, I do have some questions about, you know, the fit completely. I think they're going to push the ball down the field. I think that's going to be really smart for them. I think that's what Russell Wilson does very well. I think you look at the passer Arthur Smith's offenses, he's had a good deep attack. When you look at those A.J. Brown, Corey Davis offenses back in Tennessee when he was at his best. So I think there's a marriage there that can work, but how do you operate the middle of the field when you're, you know, someone like Russell Wilson, who has historically not targeted in the middle of the field, whether that's due to height and unwillingness, et cetera. There's causes for that. And so I'm interested to see how they kind of work around the limitations that Russell Wilson naturally brings. I'm also really interested to see what Arthur Smith learned from his tenure in Atlanta. Obviously, it didn't work out well. He had quarterback issues there, too. Certainly no sterling quarterbacks in Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder, Taylor Heineke. But how did he learn from that? What's he going to do to change the narrative around his offense? How is he going to adapt to a new era of his offense? And so I think, you know, marrying what Russell Wilson does well, changing what you do as an offensive coordinator after you were fired as a head coach, largely in part because your offenses, which you are a guru at or you're supposed to be a guru at, didn't play well. I think that's going to be very, very interesting to see. And that could be a change in run scheme, diversifying the pass scheme. But fitting it to Russell Wilson, I'm expecting, some things like pistol, shotgun, play action out of those rather than more under center. So I think we'll see some evolution to kind of marry the two, the quarterback to the offensive coordinator.
I think what happened with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields each, at least for the normal person, would have had to have been a humbling experience. Wilson had nothing but success in Seattle for such a long period of time. Fields had so much success at Ohio State. How interested are you to see how much they learned after being humbled in their previous situations before getting to Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think, Russell Wilson's taking it very well. He's kind of looking for that chip on his shoulder, that way to prove that, Denver was a fluke. Was it the situation around him? I think when you are someone like Justin Fields, it's a little different than Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson, as you mentioned, on a Hall of Fame track, certainly was in Seattle, and then all of a sudden, what happened in Denver? And so when you're Justin Fields, for example, and you come in, your draft as the first-round pick, you're kind of the franchise's chosen one, and then you kind of fall flatter than you wanted, you're out of there in 3 years, I think it's a little different because Russell Wilson has done it. He's been to the heights. So I think when Russell Wilson's going to probably end up starting to start the year, I think Justin Fields can really take some mentorship from Russell Wilson and what allowed him to get there. Because, Russell Wilson back in the day had everything for him around him. He had a great run game. He had really good receivers. He had, obviously, the Legion of Boom defense. Justin Fields hasn't been in there, but what did Russell Wilson specifically do to reach those heights? And more importantly, how does Justin Fields apply that to himself? Because he has all the physical talent. He looks like an ideal quarterback. He's extremely fast and physical. He doesn't really look like a quarterback when you see him. He's built kind of like a linebacker. And so he has all the physical traits, great arm. All of that is there for him. So I think it's going to be about how he applies himself. For Russell Wilson, it's going to be, what can you do? You're 35 years old now, and what happened in Denver to force that? And I think that's going to be what he's going to have to answer to really get back to where he's going. But I think Justin Fields has an opportunity to really turn it around. We've seen guys like Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith in recent years turn their careers around after unsuccessful starts. I think Justin Fields could be next.
They also worked hard, Nick, in the offseason to retool that offensive line, and they used the draft as a primary tool to do that. How interested are you to see how those kids mesh, the kid from Washington and Zach Frazier, and to see where they fit in with this offensive line?
I think it's maybe the most important thing that you'll find out at this training camp. Wide receiver is another question that you can answer about, but Fautanu and Frazier, these two guys are a big part of what they think is going to make the offense work. The run game is going to be heavily featured. You need these guys to both be an upgrade in pass pro, because Dan Moore was horrendous in pass pro last year, and then you need Frazier to give you a baseline level play. Rookie offensive linemen, whether that's tackle, guard, or center, generally will struggle. It's just it's a tougher position to transition to right away. You run into guys that are more explosive, that are stronger. You run into absolute freaks across for you each week because defensive tackle depth and defensive tackle talent is at a higher level than really it's ever been. And offensive line talent hasn't really risen yet. And so I'm really interested to see that because you have guys that are really going to challenge these guys. Zach Frazier, he can see guys like Keanu Benton and Cam Hayward. You talk about Fautanu. I want to see him against T.J. Watt and Alex Heisman. These guys are going to have opportunities to really sharpen themselves against really good, proven players in a camp setting. And they're so huge to this offense's success. How that is going to kind of evolve is really going to be up to those two guys. But I think, Frazier and Fautanu, I think it should be a realistic expectation. They should start week one against Atlanta. And so I'm really excited to see, from day one of training camp to the end of it, how they grow.
I'll ask you, since it's Penn State, I'll ask you a couple of Penn State-related guys in here. One's going to be Pat Freiermuth. What can having a Russell Wilson in this lineup based on past tight end usage mean to a guy like him?
Means a lot. Tight ends, Steve, can be very, very volatile players. Unless you are, a Travis Kelce, a Mark Andrews. Sometimes you really fluctuate up and down in receiving production. And Pat Freiermuth is a guy that last year only had a little over 300 yards receiving, largely due to the hamstring injury, but he's a better player than what his stats told last year. And so, the Arthur Smith offense kind of goes hand in hand with what Russell Wilson can bring too. And what it can bring is a more vertical style of passing game to Russell Wilson because, Pat Freiermuth is a guy that can work up the seam, that can work on corner routes. And so you'll see deeper passes probably to Pat Freiermuth. You'll see him more all over the formation. He'll be out wide. He'll be in line. He'll be in the slot. I think that's more where he fits into. I think he's a good route runner. I think he's very fluid, has always had elite hands. And so I think that's where he's really going to benefit from it. It's going to be kind of this mesh point of Russell Wilson, who's very willing to push the ball down the field in different situations, of course. But I think Arthur Smith is also going to be a guy. You look at how Kyle Pitts was used last year in that offense and how they moved him around the formation. Same thing with Jonnu Smith. There's no Jonnu Smith, though, to steal the targets like there was in Atlanta from Kyle Pitts. So Pat Freiermuth is going to be fed. And there's no really wide receiver 2 that's going to steal the targets either from him. So he's probably going to be the number 2 target behind George Pickens. And so I think he's due for a big year. 800 yards around there shouldn't surprise anyone.
So I'll flip it to the other side. Joey Porter had, by all accounts, a really good rookie season. He still got handsy from time to time. Where would the Steelers want to see him take the next step?
Well, I think, mitigating the handsiness is going to be very important. How can he rely more on footwork technique and just kind of mirroring guys? I think that's going to be his next step to being an elite cornerback. I think he's a very good cornerback. He was awesome last year against some of the best receivers because he just has unique tools. You talk about his length and his physicality, his willingness to be physical there. He improved on his tackling as the year went on. I thought he got better with his instincts. So that's really, the big part is going to be how can you cut down on penalties. I think the other thing is, how he works against sharper route runners. You looked at where he struggled last year, and it was against guys that were really elite route runners. Amari Cooper gave him some trouble. DK Metcalf, although he's not an elite route runner, those physical big guys like that did push him around a little bit. And DK Metcalf specifically got into his frame a little bit. So is he stronger? Does he not have to rely on his handsiness as much to keep those, kind of shiftier receivers like a Amari Cooper in the division? Can he do that? Can he limit those guys? So I think that's really the next step for him. And so, to become a true, top 10, top 5 corner, I think those are the 2 big things he's going to have to really improve on. But he laid a great base for himself. He's clearly willing to be physical. And I thought the tackling improvement showcases that other areas in his game, like the handsiness, like going up against those shiftier, crisper route runners, I think he can improve. So I'm interested to see kind of how he really takes the next step. Should be a better secondary around him, too, so he should have better support.
Right, no question. And at Penn State, Nick, of course, watching him every day, whether it was at practice and a game, first couple of years, he was handsy out there. But it felt like when he got to his last season there, he had solved a lot of that. And I think the second year in the league is going to benefit him. That's just a personal opinion. They need to have T.J. Watt out there. They need to. And this is the part they can't control. They can't control him getting hurt. But where has he become a better player when he's been out there? Because you don't just stay the same. Where's he better?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like T.J. Watt talked today up at training camp when they reported. I think part of where he's better, and it's not even on the field, it's off the field. I don't think he works himself so hard to where you make yourself more prone to injuries. Listen, his brother was J.J. Watt, and J.J. Watt is a generational player. His 3-year peak where he won those Defensive Player of the Year awards is one of the most dominant stretches of defensive play we've seen in recent memory. And so we know what happens with J.J. Watt. He gets hurt a ton, and the late years of his career were really marred by that. TJ's taken a lot of lessons from that and how to train and kind of how to keep himself healthy. So that's about as controllable as you can get it to be, but I think that's a big part of improvement. When you look on the field, I always think, his instincts have just become otherworldly. He makes absurd interceptions about 2 or 3 times a year that other edge rushers wouldn't make. I think that's a big part of it. I think the fact that he has such a hot motor, despite winning as much as he does, he's always had the athletic tools and he's always had the pass rush moves and the bend and all of that. But I think he finishes so often because he has such a hot motor, and he's relentless in his pursuit of getting those sacks. I think that's part of what has really made him go from, just this elite player to one of the top players, and he has maintained that. And so even though he doesn't maybe get the pressures or the win rate that, Myles Garrett would get, for example, what he does do is he finishes at a higher rate than anybody else in the NFL, largely because he has crafted everything from technique standpoint, his pass rush moves, bending around the arc, his motor. I just think he has crafted it perfectly to be able to finish on such a high percentage of his sacks. And so that's really where TJ Watt has taken the next level. When you talk to him, you kind of see where he has kind of polished his game off, and that's what makes a guy, an all-time great. And so that's really, I think, where he's crafted it.
Is there a player on each side of the ball that maybe people aren't talking about that will make this a better team if they just take one step forward?
I do think at wide receiver, I think Calvin Austin III is a guy that can make this a better team. He had a great spring. I just want to see consistency in his route running. He has great speed. I think he needs to get out of his head a little bit and use his speed to his advantage. I thought, he did a little too much dancing at times. So if he can do that this year, and he did in the spring, I think that's going to be a big part. And then I think on defense, it's the undrafted free agent out of West Virginia, Beanie Bishop. I really think, Cam Sutton's suspended the first 8 games of the year. They know that now. They will be missing him for the first half of the year. And Bishop had a great spring. And so that's just something, with undrafted free agents, you just want to see them continue to do. You just want to see that continue to build. And he's really plucky in coverage. He's got great ball skills. He's a physical player. He feels like he's always been doubted because of his size. And so he plays with a huge chip on his shoulder. So those are the 2 guys I would keep an eye on. Calvin Austin III at wide receiver, big need, obviously, and then slot corner, who's going to be the starting slot. I think Beanie Bishop has a chance to be that, and I think he can be a really good player for them.
Yeah, I liked him some when I saw him in Minnesota. I liked him at West Virginia. I agree with you. He's a guy that's going to make the team, and I think he could be somebody that could help him.
I really do. Beanie's got the right makeup, man. He really does.
Hey, Nick, what an absolute pleasure as always. Great information. Appreciate it. Fun time of the year, and look forward to talking more.
Thanks, Steve, for having me on. Great time as always.
Thanks, Steve. Good to be with you.
Jim Leland did a lot of great things over the course of his career. Pirates, Marlins, Tigers in particular. To you, what made him a special figure, especially in Pirates history?
Well, when he came to Pittsburgh in '86, he was relatively unknown. He had managed in the Tigers farm system for 11 years, and then he was the White Sox third base coach under Tony La Russa for 4 years. And when he got the job, the Pittsburgh Press, the now defunct Pittsburgh Press, the headline was Jim Who. So he really came in as a very unknown person, and he took over a team that had lost 105 games in 1985. You'd had the Pittsburgh drug trials that September that totally overshadowed the end of the baseball season. You had the team almost move to Denver in 1985 into a public-private consortium of 13 businesses in Pittsburgh and institutions all combined to buy the team from the Galbraith family and keep it in Pittsburgh. So he walked into an unbelievably tough situation in '86, and by '88, the Pirates had come in, had a winning season and came in second place in the National League East to the Mets. And then 90, 91, and 92, they won the division. So basically, Leland came in and transformed, had a large part in transforming the Pirates from a laughingstock and one of the worst franchises in baseball to a winner. And, he was beloved in Pittsburgh. He married a girl from Pittsburgh. He set roots in Pittsburgh, still has a home in Pittsburgh. And he just became a beloved figure. And, I thought it was very poignant what he said yesterday in his speech. He said his 11 years in Pittsburgh, it always felt like him and friends instead of him and fans.
Yeah, and not only that, to do what he did, and I go back to that era, I felt it wasn't just his ability to make lineups and make moves during the games, because I always felt he was an outstanding strategist. But I felt to get that job and to do that job, you had to have a certain personality to do that job. What kind of personality did Jim Leland bring to the table that made him different than other people?
You know, and he always brought this up. He grew up in Perrysburg, Ohio, up in the northwest corner of the state, right near Toledo, right outside of Toledo. And he was one of 11 brothers and sisters, so he had a lot of different personalities he dealt with growing up with that many siblings and his mother and father. And the one thing he was great is he could relate to all kinds of people, white players, black players, Latin players. He could, he connected with his coaching staff. He connected with the front office. He connected with the bat boys, the trainers, everybody, even the media, the guys that covered him. He was good to us. I mean, he would tell us what was going on, and when he couldn't say something, he would be honest about it instead of making up a lie. And in those kind of relationships, when you're honest with people, they go a long way. And Steve, I first met him in '86. My first year covering him was '88 as a full-time baseball writer, and we still have a very good relationship 38 years later. So, I mean, that's just the kind of guy he is, and the kind of loyalty he inspires from people who work for him.
But when you're managing the Pirates, you don't know what the front office is going to do or not do. And in the end, that team was broken up. And then he goes to the Marlins, wins there, and then to the Tigers. What does it tell us about Jim Leland, the manager, that he has excelled in other organizations and not just in Pittsburgh?
Oh, it says how adaptable he is, and like you just pointed out. I mean, in Pittsburgh, unfortunately, at one time they had the third highest payroll in baseball in 1991, and they had Ted Simmons came in as general manager. They brought in a new club president, and they said they had to take the payroll down from $57 million to $20 million. So that meant a lot of the good players either weren't tried to re-sign in free agency or were traded before they got to free agency. And Leland struggled with that, especially for the fact that they came so close to the World Series all 3 years in 90, 91, and 92, and fell short. But like you said, he went to Florida. They brought in all kind of free agents, made all kind of trades, had basically a brand new team fitting a bunch of new pieces together, and he won the World Series the first year. And then in Detroit, he goes in there, and they were awful. Yeah. And his first year, he goes to the World Series. So, a lot of things. One, like you said, a great strategist, a great tactician. But two, just the way he connects with people, the way he set the culture, the way he made the clubhouse such a fun atmosphere to play in and work in, and just his ability to connect with people and get them to believe in themselves. And he did that time and time again with different players that really just blossomed under him being the manager. And I really can't say enough about him. I've met a lot of people. I'm 60 years old, and I've met a lot of people in my life, but there are very, very few with Jim Leland's ability to communicate and to put someone at ease and make somebody feel welcome, and somebody who you just gravitate toward him. He just has that kind of personality.
What was it? Barry Bonds is certainly can be a difficult guy to deal with. How did Bonds feel about Jim Leland?
He loved Leland, and everybody goes back to that day in 1991 in spring training when Leland and Bonds had their very public argument during a workout, and went on, it was shown all over the place, national TV, and the internet wasn't around then, but if you go to YouTube, it's easy to find, and I think a lot of people thought because of that they hated each other. But the thing about Jim was, and this was great because, when I covered him, I wrote some things he didn't particularly like sometimes, and he would let me know about it. And the one thing about Jim, if he got mad at you, he didn't hold a grudge. 15 minutes later, it was over. And I can say that from personal experience, and I know dozens and dozens of players who said the same thing. If he got on you, there was a reason for it, and it was he wanted, especially player-wise, he wanted to make them better. And sometimes to make a player better, you've got to get on them and you've got to be tough with them. And I think they understood that, or they came to understand that over time, and realized that he had their best interest at heart, and he really did care for him and love him. And it wasn't a case that he hated him. He just wanted him to be better people and better players.
Well, I mean, look, in the end, if you could, like Bill O'Brien and Tom Brady had a famous one in Washington one day over Landover, and they both respect the heck out of each other. Doesn't mean it just turns out life plays out in public for sports figures. It doesn't play out, behind closed doors like it does in some other places. And obviously, Leland was a guy to be respected. What's your personal favorite story with all your dealings with him about Jim Leland?
The one that personal is I covered the Pirates for paper in Beaver County, the Beaver County Times, for 21 years, and then the Times decided to cut back, and they weren't covering the Pirates anymore, so I was out of a job, and Bob Nutting hired me to cover the Pirates for his newspapers for a year, and because I wouldn't be a rah-rah cheerleader, that didn't last. It lasted one season and moved on, and I was a free agent writer, and I became a freelancer, and I picked up, fortunately, a lot of gigs for different national publications. So it was my first year where I wasn't a Pirate beat guy for 22 years, and I mean, rightly or wrongly, and it was my identity. I'd done it for so long, and I felt a little uncomfortable, and I was making the tour of camps throughout Florida, and one day I stopped in Lakeland where the Tigers train, and Jim and I talked after the workout, and we ended up sitting there chit-chatting for a little bit more, and he goes, there's something really bothering you, isn't there? And I said, yeah. And he goes, what? And I said, and he'd known what happened in Pittsburgh with me, even though he's managing the Tigers. And he told me, he said, at the end, we get up, he shakes my hand, and really grasps it harder than normal, and holds on to it for a minute, and try not to tear up here, but he said, John, you're always welcome in the Tigers clubhouse, and I'm sure you're welcome in any other clubhouse in baseball, too. And at that point in time in my career, I needed to hear that, and that was 14 years ago, and it still sticks with me.
Wow. That's really impactful. There were other speeches yesterday, and obviously you're locked in on Jim Leland's. But did anybody else say anything that yesterday sat back and went, wow, something you didn't know before about the other inductees?
Not really, and I mean, they all were good, and they all thanked everyone. And Joe Mauer was, especially more poignant. They all were good. Adrian Beltre, Todd Helton, but I thought Joe Mauer explained it well. He had such a unique situation. He was the best the best high school quarterback in the country, and the best high school baseball player in the country his senior year at Cretin-Derham Hall in high school in St. Paul. So he was the local boy, but there were a lot of people that thought the Twins should draft somebody closer to being ready for the big leagues. They had the number one pick that year, and they went with Joe Mauer, and Joe turned into a great player. He won 3 batting titles, and he talked a little bit about the potential pressure of being the hometown kid playing for the hometown team, and how the Twins fans always supported him, always were behind him, and then he got choked up a little, which was understandable. And the largest portion of fans in attendance yesterday were definitely Twins fans. I know the hotel I stayed in, it was just Twins fans. I mean, it was like all Twins fans, except there was one wedding. And other than that, I think every other guest, except my wife and I, were Twins fans from Minnesota. Wow. So there was a really big throng of fans for Joe, and it was really cool to see. I mean, I dealt with him a few times over the years. I don't profess to know him real well, but always such a nice guy, always accommodating, always friendly, and it was really cool to see how many people. And that's not an easy trip to go from Minnesota to Cooperstown, and there's no main highways near there. There's no major airports near Cooperstown. So if you want to go from Minneapolis, I should say, to Cooperstown, you really, really got to work at it to get there. And there were thousands and thousands of Minnesotans there yesterday.
Is part of that, though, John, Maurer played his entire career with Minnesota, which, as you and I both know, has become a rarity across the board. Do you think that was a factor in all this? A hometown hero, but never played anywhere else. I mean, Beltre played a bunch of places. I mean, the one season he played in Boston, my son and I went to a game. He had a grand slam, won a game, but that was the only year he was in Boston.
Oh, yeah, I think it definitely has something to do with it, no doubt. And, especially the hometown kid on top of it, playing his whole career with the Twins. And, there were, he had his ups and downs. He won the 3 batting titles as a catcher, which no other catcher has ever done. And then he had the concussion problems, taking, foul balls off the mask and things like that. He eventually moved to first base, and the concussions took their toll. He wasn't a star player his last few years in the big leagues. He was still a good player, but he had certainly declined. And and there were some people that thought, well, maybe he should get traded, maybe they should move on from him. But the Twins stuck with him, and the fans stuck with him, and it really is just a really neat story. And really, it was really fun. It almost had more of that feel of a high school or college atmosphere where, hey, this is our guy, this is our school's guy instead of, professional team's guy. And that really stood out to me yesterday as far as the fans. I just thought it was really, really neat, Steve.
John, over the years, a lot of things have changed. Maybe they've tried to add it, make it a little bit better. Sometimes they make a change, it's worse. You've been, I'm going to assume this is not the first Hall of Fame one you've been to. So in that, guys, is it still the same, feel the same, or is there a little bit different compared to other years you've gone?
The one thing I noticed is I haven't been there in 10 years, and there's a lot more media that covers it now. Now, also part of that may have been Adrian Beltre being Dominican, and there was a lot of press in the Dominican Republic there too that maybe ordinarily wouldn't have been there if for the American players. But yeah, the thing has kind of changed, and like everything else, it's become a little more corporate and a little more buttoned down and a little more staged than it was 10 years ago, or certainly the first time I went in 2001 when Bill Mazeroski was inducted with Dave Winfield and Kirby Puckett that year. But it's still a neat town. It really is. It's a village. It's the village of Cooperstown is the official name of the place. And it's I don't know if you've ever been there, Steve, but it's a magical little place.
Yeah.
And I'm a hard-bitten guy. I've covered baseball 37 years, and, I'm kind of a little cynical, like most people would have done it this long. But you go there, and there's something special there. It reminds me of, in the movie It's a Wonderful Life, the town of Bedford Falls.
Yeah.
That's what it really reminds me of, except it's a real-life thing, and it's 70-some years after the movie was released.
I agree. I've been there twice. I've gone through the Hall of Fame a couple different times in my lifetime, and it's quaint and special. Finally, I want to ask you about Rob Manfred. Now I know he's staying on through 29 or something like that, but he always comes off as stiff. Whether it's interviews, I mean, there's just not the passion for the game. You just don't sense it. Is he like that at this as well? Is he just that stiff corporate figure, or is there a little more warmth to him that we didn't realize?
Yeah, I mean, he just doesn't resonate with fans, and I think you hit it perfectly, Steve. He doesn't seem to have a passion for the game. It seems more like he's the CEO of the game, and his job is to make as much profits as he can make, like any other business. And we know, I mean, professional sports are indeed a business, but there's something different about professional sports, where there's a passion to it more. I mean, people don't root for U.S. Steel or IBM or Microsoft. I mean, people root for the Yankees and the Pirates and the Phillies and the California Angels and go right down the list. And yeah, even yesterday, he's from that neck of the woods. He grew up in Rome, New York, which is only not even quite an hour from Cooperstown. And of course, the MC Brian Kenny from MLB Network said, "Here, our local man from Rome, New York, Rob Manfred," and nobody booed him, but nobody Yeah, but nobody either cheered him either. It was just kind of nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just I want my people around me to love the game. All right?
Yes.
And love the sport. I know he's an attorney, but you can't act the entire time like you're an attorney. This is sport. This is sports. I know it's a business, but it's a business that brings with it passion of the fans who are around it. You have to have a feel for that. And see, that's the part I don't think he has a feel for at all.
No, he just doesn't seem to enjoy. Whereas me or you, if we were in that position and we had a chance to be there on the dais at Cooperstown with 50-some Hall of Famers sitting behind us, it would be the thrill of a lifetime. But for him, it's just almost like it's not even business as usual. It's almost like, I'm bothered to be here. I wish I could be somewhere other than here. And it's just mind blowing, Steve. I mean, it is.
I mean, John, you and I would have goosebumps, and he's like, "Okay, and you're Sandy Koufax. Who'd you pitch for?" Okay.
Yeah, really.
Always a pleasure, John. I love talking baseball with you. Appreciate you so much. Thanks for the time.
My pleasure, Steve. Anytime. Always good to speak with you, too.
Yeah, doing good. Just got back from Cooperstown last night from the ceremony. So, yeah, and the All-Star last week. So it was a crazy, fun but crazy week.
I want to ask about Cooperstown first. Is that the kind of place, and when you see all the Hall of Famers from the past up on stage with the new ones about to be inducted, is that one of those? I mean, I realize you've done this a long time, but is it still a goosebump moment?
It's very cool. I mean, the first time guys are so excited, and for the guys, the Hall of Famers that come back every year, just they're one chance to see everybody and catch up and tell stories at the at the bar at the hotel. But yeah, they golf and stuff. But yeah, it's like when they say what Disneyland is the happiest place on earth, it's probably the happiest place on earth, but for baseball players.
Okay, so now we get to this part. And I've asked you this question, I feel like every year the last few years, but there's so many teams that have an opportunity at this stage to think they can make the playoffs because of the expanded field. Does it make it more difficult at times to judge sellers versus buyers?
This one, this one, I think there might be fewer sellers than ever. I don't remember this many teams. Of course, expand the wild cards, but this many teams in the race. You only have like 5 teams that are completely out of it. So, yeah, I think a lot of teams don't know what to do. So I think we're going to see a lot of teams just stand pat. Like, you know what? We're not going to buy, we're not going to sell. And the thing is, too, is people, may think that, well, if we make the playoffs, how far are we going to go? But then you look at the Arizona Diamondbacks last year and say, wait a minute now, they're the last team in, they made the World Series. So, yeah, I think it will be a lot less active than people think. If it's active, it's, a lot of, relievers and more smaller type players. So I'm not, providing Tarek Skubal's not moved, go and throw in Garrett Crochet. But besides those 2 guys, I'm not sure there's a difference maker out there.
Right, because, there's not a Justin Verlander you can pick up at a trade at this particular point that's going to swing it one way or the other. Crochet's, with the White Sox, America doesn't really know much about him because he plays for the White Sox. What kind of potential difference maker could he make to a contender?
Well, that's a big question, Steve, is that this guy's already thrown more innings than he has his entire career, just because he's been, hurt a lot. And so no one knows, how much can he pitch, the second half. His reliever, he's converted to a reliever. And so you're probably not going to be able to start him in September or October, but, you should be able to pitch in relief. So, but the big thing is you still have him for 2 more years. And right now he's probably making the minimum salary, $800,000. So, but yeah, that's the only, big asterisk is what can he give you down the stretch.
The Cubs are in an interesting spot. They're in the neighborhood of the playoffs. Not in, but they're in the neighborhood of it. What is the feeling there with the Cubs about keeping their nucleus together long-term versus short-term gain of making a deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now they're in a situation just, hold them. It's like, they're not in the race. They're not really out of it. And they're saying, you know what, it'd be stupid to trade prospects and go for it. So I think they'd be leaning more on the seller part. Like, let's give away some free, some fringe parts that, we can, get a nice return for. Because there's so few sellers, I think they may be looking at it as an opportunity. Like, okay, let's gear up for 2025.
Who would you expect to be the aggressive ones that will attempt to make deals? Was it the usual crowd that we would expect? Yankees, Dodgers, Padres, people like that?
Yeah, it would. Yeah, exactly. Those teams. I think Seattle's going to be desperate to get an offensive, get a bat. Their pitching is so good. It's a shame to waste that pitching because it's so dominant. Nobody wants to face the Mariners in the first round. So, but yeah, I mean, the Dodgers have invested so much money in this team. For them, it's World Series championship or bust. I know people say that, but for them, it really is. I think it's very embarrassing for them not to at least make the World Series. And the Yankees, I think they need to go at least until late October, whether it's a World Series or at least deep in the ALCS, where they'll consider their season failure.
All right, so then there's the Astros, who got off to a tremendous 12-24 start and were essentially buried, yet they've come back. So when you look at them at this point and Dana Brown, does he become slightly aggressive at this point?
He does. I mean, the window's starting to close there. I mean, you don't have, Bregman's a free agent after the year. Verlander's a free agent after the year. Don't have much of a farm system. So I think they'll be, not real aggressive, but semi-aggressive. It's amazing what they've done with all the pitching injuries. And, still be, tied for first place, right there. It's amazing. So I think they'll do everything possible just because this team is used to, winning in October. And but this will be 7 straight, ALCS appearances.
I looked up underachieving in the dictionary, and the Toronto Blue Jays team picture came up. So when you look at them, and look, they've got talent, but how active do you expect them to be on the selling part of this, and how active are people going to be in terms of making phone calls to Toronto?
There'll be a lot of phone calls to Toronto, particularly for Kikuchi, who's available. We'll see about Bassett. They got, Jansen, the catcher. So, George Springer. So, no, I think teams will be very aggressive with them. I don't think they want to, give away their future. I think they still want to go for it in 2025. Last year, Bichette. Last year, Vlad Guerrero. Yeah, they have achieved. They haven't won a playoff game since Alex Santopoulos left of Atlanta in 2015. So you got to think there's going to be some firing sets after the season.
Right. No question about that. It just seems like they're on that pathway. Unfortunately for them, because, it sounds like they're not untalented. They are. Cleveland has been a great story from day one. If they make any changes, would they be subtle ones based on the nucleus they already have?
It would be. And they could use some outfield help for sure. Their starting pitching has been a struggle. They would like to do that. But I can't see them, going all in, trading away some top prospects and going for it. These, in their mind, they're going to say, are we really going to beat up the Yankees? Are we going to beat out, Baltimore Orioles? That sort of thing.
Or people around here, of course, will ask about the Phillies, who have had, obviously, a tremendous season to this point. Dave Dombrowski's usually pretty savvy around this time of the year. What do you expect from them?
I think they got another outfield bat, a right-handed hitter, coming through with Marsh. And, it's a bullpen. Their bullpen is struggling of late. They don't need to do much, but they could use a back end reliever for sure. It's just like that's haunted me for years as far as not having that lights out closer. Whatever Benoit, blowing it against the Red Sox with David Ortiz, home run 13, and on. Those bullpens across Dave. So I think they're going to go get their back end reliever for sure.
They do have to. The Red Sox were interesting. Hot right before the break. Since the break, have not won a game. Now, 4 of them were against the Dodgers at Chavez Ravine. Where are they right now with all this and Craig Breslow?
Well, I don't think they're going to buy. I think they'll either mildly sell or stay pat. I don't think they thought they'd be in position to be in final position. I don't think realistically they think they would go to the World Series. They want to keep Alex Cora. But he's really one thing possible. To let him know they're in to win. But I don't see him being aggressive at all. I think they'll could even make some moves there for the future. Whether it's Dylan Jansen or something like that. And say, you know what, bear with us. We're going to try to be a very good team and open the window up beginning in 2025.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I have to ask you, Tampa Bay made a big step forward with the package to stay in St. Petersburg. I believe it still has to go to a referendum, I believe. So
I think, I guess somewhere, I think, let's say tomorrow night.
Yeah.
But they could the first big steps. I think the second one, will happen, which will approve that $6.5 billion project.
So if the A's are settled on Las Vegas and Tampa Bay is settled on a new ballpark in St. Petersburg, does that now open the door to expansion based on what Rob Manfred outlined a couple of years ago?
Well, it does, but I don't think the timetable has changed at all. I still think you're thinking 2029 at the earliest, more likely 2030. And the two teams or two cities continue to be, Nashville and Salt Lake City.
Salt Lake City's interesting. I mean, they just got a hockey team to go with the basketball team. Nashville, we know, they're about as organized as you can be. And at one point, Dave Dombrowski was part of that organization. What's made Salt Lake City emerge in your mind?
I think they have a big-time ownership group. I want to say involves the owner of the Utah Jazz, the Miller family. Yep. And just the money's in place. They think they can build a stadium. The hunger's there. They don't think they have to go too many loopholes to get what they want. And of course, it'd be nice to have a team, out west if you're going to have a team, in the Central Time Zone. Baseball would love to go to back to Montreal. But just nobody has stepped forward, and I don't think they have any confidence at all they can get a stadium. So particularly with what Oakland's gone through, Tampa, Miami, you better have everything in place and not take any chances.
In your opinion, Bob, what kind of season has this been for baseball? Has this been a good season, an excellent season, an okay season? What kind of season to this point do you think it's been?
It's been a good season. I know attendance is up, TV rings is up, a lot of young talent, and I think with all these teams in the race, it helps. I'm sure they're hoping it stays through till September, so you can get some nice September crowds. But there's nothing been historic about it. Obviously, Ohtani's having their fabulous year, Judge is having their great year. They haven't had. They've had some controversies, obviously, with the gambling scandal and that sort of thing. But I think in general, baseball's pretty happy.
Well, we're always happy when we have you on. Thanks so much, Bob, for your time. As always, great information, and appreciate you very much.
All right, my pleasure. Take care, Steve.